Once a man named Stephen preached about the Lord. Folks were saved and folks were healed as they heard his word. Satan did not. Once a man named Stephen preached about the Lord. Folks were saved and folks were healed as they heard his word. Satan did not like it. Soon he had his crowd. And as he was tried, they heard Stephen cry aloud. I see Jesus standing at the Father's right hand. I see Jesus yonder in the promised land. Work is over, now I'm coming to thee. I see Jesus standing waiting for me. As the stones fell on him, beating out his life, Stephen knew he'd soon be through with all toil and strife. So much like the Master, with the heart so true, he prayed, Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Well, welcome everyone to the most moderate podcast in our corner of the internet radiosphere. Of course, we're talking about Presbycast. I'm Presbyterian. Chortles Weekly is here, and we have multiple guests, multiple talking heads to look at you, and you can spend the whole time wondering what they're actually looking at while other people are talking, because no one really looks directly into the camera anymore, if there's one thing we've learned over the last year. But Chortles, I have taken up a new hobby. I know that we don't often talk. We don't do reviews, but I've started homebrewing. I have an entire homebrew email server in my bathroom now. I wasn't sure if I was going to have much use for it, but it seems like we could fill a keg or two with conversation.
Do you have any leaks? Do you have any leaks? That's what I need to know.
I don't. Not just yet, but I'm. Every time I walk in my house, I try to, just like see if something might be getting out there. But as of right now, not trying to brew anything too extreme. Just trying to keep it right down the middle, like we always do.
Well, that's where we're going to try to stay tonight, right in the middle, in reasonable land.
So, for those of you who've scheduled this, we hope that you've scheduled your listening accordingly.
That's right. Scheduling is very important.
Always responsibly for no apparent reason.
Yeah, it's time for everyone to show up, because we're about to vote for Presbycast here. Well, I've titled this broadcast tentatively PCA On the Brink. I don't think that's an unreasonable title. We've had multiple stressors, as they say. We had Revoice. We've done many shows about that. We had the SJC decision, which was controversial, and it's I won't say it's not an acquittal of Greg Johnson, but a confirmation of the trial that Missouri Presbytery conducted, their investigation. But this week, or I guess it was late last week, Thursday and Friday, Presby Leaks hit, and that is an eminently political controversy in the PCA, and because there have been things written about it, I think we can safely talk about it. But we have two guests. Let me bring them up. We have
well, many people don't realize is that you're actually doing this from the Presbyterian Embassy in Geneva, where you've had to take asylum for fear of arrest should you ever leave the grounds.
I didn't want to talk about that, but we had a few technical difficulties tonight and a delay, and it may be that famously bad Swiss internet. Now that you mention it, so we've got teaching elder Stephen Spinnenweber, the most well-groomed man in Presbyland. And we've got Gabe Williams, who, well, you just wouldn't want to mess with him. So how are you guys?
Doing all right.
Doing great. Enjoying Florida with Gabe down here.
All right, so you're in North Florida, right?
Yes, sir.
And Gabe's a little more central Florida, as it were.
Right.
Well, Gabe's
Enjoying
been on the
some
show.
beautiful weather.
Gabe's been on the show before, and Pastor Spinnenweber, who also has the coolest last name of any guest that we've ever had. In my phone, he's just Spin, so that's pretty cool too.
That's what all the kids are saying. Saying that's
show
Spin,
us, show
man.
us your coffee. Show us your coffee mug there, and that's Joey Papa's face on a mug.
That's good stuff.
On a mug.
Not divisive at all. So
Winsome.
that will always, and everyone likes a cold beverage. So Stephen,
Scheduled accordingly and responsibly.
scheduled, yes, so as not to mess up a vote or a podcast. So Stephen, you wrote 4 articles on Revoice before we talk about Presby Leaks. You were on the Overtures Committee this year.
Yes, sir.
So you were intimately involved with the overtures. I should say, and let me go ahead and share my screen. The overtures, which are very important. Numbers 23 and 37. You were involved in their creation. All the haggling that went on with that. It doesn't look like there's an excellent chance that they're going to pass, in my view. But this is still not a moot conversation because the issue's not going away, and there'll be more of these things. But as of now, it's 19 overtures to 11. We need 59 to approve, and I don't see it happening, but well, who knows? Who knows what the recent developments, the effect that they might have, and other things that will happen in the coming days. But tell us about your interest in the Revoice issue, your work on the Overtures Committee, and what prompted you to write the 4 articles for Dominic Aquila.
Yeah, well, I was honored to serve on the Overtures Committee as a representative of North Florida Presbytery, and this was my first GA, both as a commissioner and serving on a committee. So seeing how the sausage gets made in the Overtures Committee, that was something that I expressed to my admin committee that I'd be interested in observing and participating in if they would allow me that, and very graciously they did. And as the overtures were coming up, and you kind of know the back and forth, we had to reconvene to reconsider Overture 23. It seemed clear, even after the resolution of that meeting and the minority report that was given on the floor of GA by the ruling elder from Piedmont Triad, that the fight was not over, though it was pretty decisively won at GA. I think over 1,000 commissioners voted in favor of both overtures. Is that about right?
Yeah, it was, one of them was around 70-30. The other one was, maybe 65-35, 60-40, something like that.
Yeah, and so like everybody else, I walked away very encouraged. I thought that the PCA made a statement that we are going to maintain the traditional biblical sexual ethic, and that we wanted to do it with a posture wherein we invite the same-sex attracted struggler to join with heterosexual strugglers and sinners of all stripes and types to mortify their sin, to cling to Christ, and that their sanctification is just as possible as is mine. So I thought that these were good statements, but it was clear with the minority report and people signing their names to the no or protesting against these overtures that the fight was not over. So though a first down, it was not a touchdown. And when the public advice from the National Partnership came out, you had done a show on it. It was thereafter that I thought, there could be some wisdom in addressing some of the claims and arguments made by the PA at length, because the National Partnership took time to compose this list of arguments against. And so kind of responding in kind and in a public manner, arguing for the merits of overtures 23 and 37. Like you said, there are three basic plays that I see the PA running, and that is that the overtures are unclear, unnecessary, and unloving. But it's a four-part series because a lot of freight I felt was put behind the unclear argument. What does identity mean? What does identify by sinful attractions? So spent a lot of time with that one. So did 2 articles on unclear, 1 article on unnecessary, and 1 article on unloving.
So the three U's, very, very catchy, but it took 4 parts to get 3 U's, and that's okay. So can you summarize them, these arguments briefly, and for those who haven't been following?
Yeah, so the unclear argument from the PA, I'm going to just read from part of this.
When you say PA...
forgive me, the public advice of the National Partnership.
Okay, good. I got you.
So when they argue that the language is unclear, that it's going to create constitutional confusion, that it's subject to wide interpretation, it creates ambiguity. I found that what it seemed to be saying is that it's unclear if this overture, 23 or 37, if these overtures disqualify a same-sex attracted individual from ministry altogether. So if a person confesses that he struggles with same-sex attraction, do either of these overtures make it impossible for this person to hold ordained office in the PCA? I would argue no. But what the overtures were saying is that same-sex attracted individuals don't have the right, that they do not have the latitude to continue to identify themselves by their besetting sin like anybody else. You would say, who struggles with a particular sin, whether it be racism, financial mismanagement, substance abuse. We don't identify ourselves by other besetting sins. And so this individual is not disqualified by virtue of struggling with sin, but is his struggle to the degree and to the tune that we would be satisfied with this individual's sanctification. And I think that both overtures 23 and 37 do allow a person to confess that he struggles with these, takes them to the cross, identifies them for what they are, that they are sins themselves. The attraction to sin is sin. So these are not witch hunts. These were not ways for us to, have a second-grade ejection and to expel anyone who is transparent about their sexual struggles. So that's sort of the unclear coin. And then we've got unnecessary. And you'll see a lot with the unnecessary arguments that it's redundant, that overtures 23 and 37 ultimately are redundant because our confession in chapter 6 and chapter 13 already deals with the doctrines of concupiscence, already deal with the motions of the sinful nature being properly sin themselves. So kind of took the space of that article to just say, look, our BCO already repeats and amplifies theology and doctrine from our confession. In fact, that's only appropriate. And even our confessional standards themselves, the larger catechism, shorter catechism, and confession, they overlap in multiple places. So what the PA claims to be redundancy, we might call repetition or reinforcement. And certainly if there's any place or any vulnerability in the evangelical church and in the evangelical world right now that the unbelieving culture is trying to attack, it is our doctrine of human sexuality. It's, do we believe that sex is between a husband and a wife? And so I think we need and that these overtures provide the necessary reinforcement to withstand the cultural pressure that's being applied to the church from outside.
So you think they're clear, not unclear, and that may actually be what some people don't like about them.
Yeah, I think that these are very clear, and that we cannot hide behind terminology, because I think that Overture 23 particularly demonstrates the incongruity between saying I'm a gay Christian, same-sex attracted Christian, and our identity being in Christ. So we don't do this with any other sin. We do not put as a sidecar our besetting sin of choice next to our Christian identity. And that is an identity term. That is an identifier. I am a Christian. So whenever we put something beside that or make it adjacent to it, we believe in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, that such were, past tense some of you. Now, on GA, on the floor, somebody had made the claim that, brothers, we're not Wesleyans, we're not perfectionists. And sometimes when I hear people quote 1 Corinthians chapter 6, it smacks of Wesleyan perfectionism. But understand that everyone here, we believe in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 just as much as we believe in Romans chapter 7. We believe that we are no longer identified or named by our sin, but will we continue to war against the sins of the flesh? Absolutely.
Well, I think you made a great point in your first post about that, the use of that unclear language. They're saying it's unclear, and you kind of put it back on them, and it's true. And I'll quote part of it. Here's my logic. If the AIC's recommendation to shepherds is for them to dissuade their sheep from using unwise identifiers like gay Christian, then how much more should we expect a man who aspires to be a shepherd to refrain from using the same identifiers? And you're right. That does make things unclear when they're using those terms to identify themselves, claiming that it will make them more accessible to people, laity who struggle with these things. And, I was appalled after GA at the constant homophobic type, moniker that we were given by brothers who were even in overtures arguing their case, coming out of GA and taking to social media, acting like we don't care about homosexuals. That's not the point. And your point here about the leadership using the language, it just falls under, I think, what we've been saying all along is there's a different expectation for leadership. And for them to say that there's already overlap, that we don't need to make it part of our Constitution, we don't need to make it clear in the BCO. Well, the fact that they are pushing the envelope as far as they are, even though our standards are clear, only goes to show that we do need to put something that is enforceable. They all loved the report until it translated into something that can hold them to account. And now it seems that they hate the sentiment included.
And case in point, Gabe, too, Resby.
I was just gonna say, like as a layperson, it was very much clear to see that it was talking about a leadership position and not someone just coming into the church. I mean, it was theology. I just do this podcast, so but even so, like reading it, it was very clear. Okay, they're talking about leadership because there's obviously a higher standard here, and I think with even a cursory reading of the qualification passages from the New Testament, you would be able to glean that as well. Like it just wasn't a huge leap in logic to make that distinction. So I mean, dare I say it's kind of insulting to be told that people aren't going to be able to make that distinction when it's quite clear.
Well, let me say two things quickly. Let me remind everyone that in 2018, there was a struggle to make one sentence. It's what we ended up finally doing. One sentence in Chapter 59, Directory of Worship. Not all of that chapter is constitutional, but there was a move to make one section constitutional so that it clarified that marriage was only to be between a man and a woman. And you would think that it would have been easy, but there were those on the other side, as it were, who really pushed back and wanted the language to be as mild as possible. So we shouldn't really be surprised that this is a struggle, because this is a much more direct, and it's just, I guess a lot of us forgot that it was difficult, and some people thought we had saved the denominator because 2018 was the first Revoice year. There was nothing before the assembly about Revoice, but the chapter 59 of the BCO, the Directory for Worship, that was the issue, and even that wasn't easy. So we shouldn't expect anything, I think, here to be easy. But maybe the clarity was more of a problem than the unclarity. That's what I'm suggesting.
To that point, Charles, that the argument and the play there. So, I mean, these are the three basic plays in the playbook, I find. It's either unloving. I mean, anything that, and I'll just say progressives, and that is the words of our
Brian Chappell's
Brian
term.
Chappell,
Right.
42nd General Assembly. I'll refer to us as traditionalists, but the progressives, the three basic plays are unloving, unnecessary, and unclear. And in the BCO 59, it was, this is unnecessary because the confession already speaks to this. But I think that the denomination was wise to understand that the cultural pressure and that there could perhaps be legal recourse, from outside, that we need to make this constitutionally binding. And to Gabe's point, kind of with how we love the AIC and we love the language of the AIC, we're going to sing its praises on social media. But once the language of the AIC is interwoven into our BCO, suddenly we take issue. One of the words that's been kind of picked apart of late is identity. And that identity, that there are far superior terms like union with Christ, that this language is relatively novel, that it rose to fame sort of in the 1990s and is a offshoot of Keswick perfectionistic theology. But if you read the AIC on pages 26, 27, and 28, the committee
that's the sexuality report.
Yes, sir. 26, 27, and 28 talk at length both about Christian identity and sexual identity. So even the framers of our Human Sexuality Study Report didn't bristle at the language of identity. So did you like the AIC, or are we now finding issues with the AIC and its integration into the BCO? So I struggle to see why this is not celebrated and applauded as a wonderful opportunity to apply the wisdom of the study committee to our standards.
Well, and we never heard that disagreement with the term identity, after the report and everybody was commending it. We did not hear that until after GA, this past GA. So it's probably, if you were to go back and the men who were complaining about that term now, I imagine you could go through their sermons and find plenty of references of our identity in Christ. I've seen it in the Facebook arguments and things like that. So it really didn't become a problem for any of them. And like you said, that 2018, that it was that they said it was unnecessary, and I did hear unloving too, that it would hang a not welcome sign. Same argument they used against the Nashville statement. And I actually presented the minority report in my presbytery for that, and I thought as a teaching elder would love that, because as far as litigation goes, civil court is not going to care about our Westminster Confession of Faith, but the BCO, in their eyes, would probably hold more weight because you're agreeing to that contract of conduct, which they would view differently. I thought it was great, but yeah, same. You're right. The top three arguments against almost everything with teeth.
Yeah, and I know we've probably got to move on, but the Greg Johnson in his interview on Canon, not Canon Press, the
Cross Politic.
Cross Politic, he did mention in that 2018 interview that identity is a relatively novel term, but you all have seen this on social media channels of late, how the PCA is kind of being cast as a side B denomination, or that it always has been. And there's been some contention about the novelty.
Or that historic Christianity always has been. They've invoked C.S. Lewis, John Stott, Billy Graham, and Richard Lovelace. All those guys were invoked as, well, if they were here today, they'd all think this was just normal.
Which is anachronistic at best. And what's so interesting is that people have traced back, how far does the terminology of side B go? And I think the earliest that somebody was able to point to was 1998 and Ron Belgao. But if you are going to use that term and you're going to wring your hands at saying that identity is such a novel word, it came to be in our verbiage in the 1990s, then I really think that side B and identifiers like it should also be off the table if you're going to be consistent with giving the stiff arm to anything that is new or novel. But yeah.
Yeah, as for the term, I was castigated for saying it was only about 10 years old. You can't really find it on the internet, on an internet search before 2013. Someone told me that they had been to seminars in the 90s where the term was getting bandied about, and I thought it was probably Wesley Hill's book around 2011 was that's really where it came into the mainstream a bit. But yeah, the point is, the term and the concept side B gay Christianity is younger than the internet. It's younger than it's barely 20 years old, so maybe 25. And we know that, the first few decades of a concept is where the most change comes in. These terms are not static. They're in motion. These movements are not static. These concepts are developing. And all of that, that advises caution, in my opinion.
And when we use,
do we have any idea where in the Facebook metaverse all of this will fall? I feel like we're not really asking the important questions yet.
I don't want to put those goggles on.
No.
No boosters, no goggles.
Yeah. But the appropriateness of identifying yourself as a side B gay Christian, just think of it, guys. If the line is so fine between, we have repentant side B, as I understand they're using that term, and then on the other side, we have people that have altogether jettisoned the historic Christian biblical ethic, and we're under the same terminological umbrella. None of us would want to fall under that if a line between apostasy and fidelity. I struggle to find why it's wise at all to continue to identify yourself by this fairly large tent, wherein, especially with the initial revoice meeting, even if some PCA teaching elders do not deny or do not deny the sinfulness of fallen attractions, there are others in that camp that do. And is it wise to keep aligning ourselves with such individuals?
Yeah, I think there's the common sense argument that this needs to be handled with great caution and to go very slowly, because we've seen changes and shifts in some good or maybe even some bad directions in the 3 years that all this has existed. and I guess maybe the COVID year is a ringer. So it's really barely 3 years old as a movement. Anything else you want to say about your articles? Because we want to talk a little bit about the SJC decision itself and what it might mean. But your last article, let's see, what did it cover? There we are. I've got it on screen.
Yeah. This third one, that the overtures are unloving, that these are really cudgels used to beat or to box in same-sex strugglers within our churches, and that it's not a good sign, or that it's not a good look to the watching world. And yet, I think that the experience of Christians for 2,000 years, by and large, has been societal rejection. Now, we ought not to go looking to, give more offense than the gospel does already. We're the people that believe in total depravity, after all, and that we can't save ourselves. But at the end of the day, the consequences belong to the Lord. So we should just be faithful to proclaim the gospel in the gracious manner and posture that our Lord did during his earthly ministry. And we shouldn't be surprised when the culture pushes back and isn't even hostile to what we're doing. So I don't know if it's a consequence of the last 20, 30 years or just broader evangelicalism historically, but I think that there's this unspoken expectation that if you're doing it right, that if you're persuasive enough, people will warm up to what you're saying. And generally speaking, the history of the church, that when Christians are faithful, they are opposed. So we shouldn't fear what the world thinks about our message. After all, the gospel that we proclaim is foolishness. The Greek words there, moron, right? It's moronic to those that are perishing. And those within our churches, and this is where I mentioned one PCA teaching elder, by name, when the words that we use with the best of intentions and even with careful language are twisted, or they are heard in the worst light possible, we can no longer dialogue. We can no longer sharpen iron as iron sharpens iron. And that leads us to a breakdown in communication. It leads to breakdown in fellowship, and it is unto disunity. So if we can't talk about brother to brother, about the wisdom of how we communicate ourselves, of the movements with which we align ourselves, then, as you say, the PCA is heading toward a breaking point, or like the brink. We need to be able to speak about even spirited theological disagreements without assuming the worst of the other. So that was what this third article is about. We have to assume the person speaking the truth in love.
I think this is a good place to try to answer the question that surely a lot of people have. Why is this issue, and I don't think this was orchestrated, I do think there were side B people in the St. Louis area, Covenant Seminary. There was some, the concepts were even present in the RPCES that came into the PCA 1980, and almost all of Missouri Presbytery was former RPCES. But why is this issue sort of a banner or a mascot or an indispensable thing for part of the PCA, seemingly? I mean, someone told me today that a major PCA figure and a major side B figure have made some videos together, and they're going to come out soon. And knowing who the two people are, it's going to rock the PCA even further. And it's a pro side B, pro revoice presentation, as I'm given to understand. So the issue has become non-optional for some people. There has to be room made for side B gay Christianity in the PCA. So why is that? Let me give my quick answer, and it ties into something you just said, Stephen. It's the old, if people like us, they'll like Jesus. That's evangelicalism. It's revivalism. It's pragmatism. It may have the best of motives behind it, but I think it has more in common with low evangelicalism and revivalism than it has with classical reformed, practice and order and piety. So I'd like to hear from Gabe, but at first I want to hear from you, Stephen. Why do you think that this issue is even with us, and why has it become so important when some people would say, is this worth all the trouble that it seemingly has caused?
Good question. I think that it's generationally, it's very interesting. So I don't know if a lot of millennials are leaving the faith necessarily because they are questioning. I think that the biblical sexual ethic, I think that deep down inside, people know that it makes sense. And yet they're realizing that it is going to really hamstring you in terms of your relationship building. And we put a ton of freight, I think, behind relationships in our evangelism. So friendship evangelism, I'm sure that's a relatively novel term. And what we're finding is that if we maintain these biblical sexual ethics to the degree that the church has maintained them so unwaveringly for the last 2,000 years, that's going to cost us relational capital, and then our evangelism will be stifled. And after all, we don't want to be the frozen chosen, and so we need to find a different way to evangelize these individuals and evangelize this community. So I think there's sort of the pent-up cultural pressure on one end. Why has this become an issue? Why is the church, saying how high? Because I think the broader culture is saying jump. But beside that, I think that well-meaning Christians, as you've said before, Chortles, we don't want to lose the church. We don't want to lose the next generation. We want to save the church. And so I think there's, as you said, well-meaning and good intentions trying to make the gospel palatable to the unbeliever. But in so doing, we rob it of a lot of its power to convict and to prick the conscience and ultimately to convert the sinner. So
someone needs to do a dissertation on if we don't do X, we'll lose the young people. Because I know that goes back at least 200 years. Who knows? We might find it in the First Great Awakening. I know there were a lot of, as I've read accounts, young women were particularly affected in some of the ecstatic expressions and that sort of thing. So who knows? There may have been a tolerance for some of that, even for the youth ministry of the day, and who knows what the Roman Church did before the Reformation for the young people. So yeah, that's that someone needs to examine that. And let me throw in here before we go to Gabe. Is this not just an example of missional contextualization taken to its logical extent? I mean, I think some of your Revoice people would say we're contextualizing our speech and our presentation and the way we present ourselves, the way we talk about culture. We're contextualizing for this segment of people that we want to reach. So I think that's part of it as well. But Gabe, what do you think?
I think, Stephen is right about everything he said. One thing that jumped out at me is the cultural pressure. If you look at all of the current movements in the culture, the LGBT movement has become by far the biggest infiltrator of everything. I mean, we all agree that racism is bad, right? But we didn't have children's cartoons 2 years ago featuring anything about racism, as far as, they didn't have BLM protests in Blues Clues and things like that, but you are seeing cross dressers and things like that at kids. Reading to kids at libraries. You're seeing things in cartoons that my kids used to watch when they were young, now having gay pride parades and things like that. So that's one of the things that got Dave Chappelle in all the trouble, was that he lamented that movement has completely taken over and steamrolled over every other movement. So I think because it's such a loud voice in the culture today, there are those in the church that just think they can't ignore it. And, I appreciate that our teaching elders are educated men, but unfortunately, the secular part of that education comes with a lot of bad baggage. So they go into seminary these days already with a pretty worldly and culturally influenced worldview, maybe even more than they think. And then if they don't go to the right seminary, then that bias is just built up rather than diminished through proper teaching. So I just think the church often follows the culture, whatever's big. I mean, I remember as a teenager going to the school gym to watch the traveling band of fundamentalists play Kiss records backwards and tell us that it says something about knights and Satan's service or something. So the church is always following what the culture, what's big in the culture. It's just, this is something that we are looking at, that missional accommodation, speak the language so they love us and understand us, and then they'll love Jesus too. But it just seems time and time again that we're leaving out the new man. I listen to these guys, and I never hear the point where they say, now go and sin no more. And, I always think of the rich young ruler. I've probably said it every time I was a guest. Jesus didn't for him other than to tell him that he wasn't good enough and that he wouldn't give up the stuff that really was Lord in his life. And I think that's the message that we need to be sending, is we have a Savior who loves us and died for us. And if you're elect, then you need to be the new man and stop clinging to this identity or whatever you want to call it or don't want to call it. Incidentally, talking about terms, I searched the hashtag LGBT in Christ, which Greg is using to promote his book. And as far back as I can tell, that goes is to 2018. But using that is just another example of one of the ways that we see in these complaints, and the one that went to the SJC and in this one that's still being considered, is that he uses that unclear and confusing language to identify himself in, and I think it's detrimental. It should be hashtag new man, and that should be the end of it.
Well, the disturbing thing about, that's not the only disturbing thing, but the thing about LGBT in Christ as a hashtag and maybe as an identity is it includes the T. And so I always like to ask what's next, because this is not a train that'll stop with 4 letters, I don't think. And there's going to be, again, one day we may have a conference for polyamory attracted Christians and bigamist attracted Christians, and who knows what else. Some of the things I don't want to imagine or contemplate, but by the logic of Revoice, I'm afraid, and the logic of Side B, we may be in for a lot of things we don't want. But homosexual issues seem to be a sort of magic sin, culturally acceptable sin, and something that comes with all sorts of benefits in the culture and the arts and in the city, very importantly. So maybe that's part of it. So before we move on to Presby Leaks, let's quickly talk about the SJC decision, and we did a whole show on that. That show had the most listens of any in the first 7 days of any show we've ever done, and so the interest is high. Stephen, you've read the decision. Gabe, you probably have too. One of the talking points, and this sort of leads into our last topic, but is that the SJC decision, which was really an evaluation of Missouri Presbytery's actions to this point, amounted to an acquittal or an exoneration of Greg Johnson, that the matter is over, and that even talking about this the way we're talking about it tonight is wrong. And there's almost been the suggestion that if you don't start talking about this, you're in sin and you're maybe liable to charges and judgment. So, Stephen, how do you view the SJC decision, which was not quite close enough to allow a General Assembly vote? That particular case is ended.
Well, I was disappointed. I was hoping that more would see the merits of the complaint filed against Missouri Presbytery by Teaching Elder Ryan Speck. If those who voted in the minority on the SJC are not liable to be put under discipline because of their vote, I don't think that anyone who would agree or who would voice their disagreement with the majority on the SJC would or should be guilty of discipline. So, and I want to say too, it's really interesting. If you read the language of the SJC's decision, particularly after each of the 4 complaints or allegations, I don't know if you could pull that up on the screen, but at the end of allegation 1, the language reads, if the teaching elder had said these things, if he had actually, if the record demonstrated that the teaching elder said these things, then there would be room or there would be merit to a complaint. Yeah, so if the record demonstrated the above statements were an accurate summary of Teaching Elder Johnson's views, it would have been proper to sustain the complaint. So taking this back to 23 and 37, it appears that the SJC agrees with the spirit of 23 and 37. They are just saying that Greg Johnson, based on their research and their examination, didn't say these things. So while Greg Johnson, the individual, may, and people will say he's exonerated, others may disagree, but even if Greg Johnson was, or the presbytery, was not found to be in error in the way that his investigation was conducted, it does seem from the language of the SJC that if Teaching Elder Johnson or anyone maintained these views, there is legitimacy to that person being complained against. So I think, if anything, the SJC report reinforces the theology of 23 and 37, and we should vote them up for that reason.
All right, Gabe, what's your, so I think the talking point is this ends the matter, and you shouldn't say anything else. There is something in our confession about councils being liable to something less than perfection, that church courts, councils, local sessions, ministers can err. They can make mistakes, and for that reason, I would think alone, it's really never the end. Now it's the end on the things that are affirmed in the ecumenical creeds. You can't be a PCA minister and say, well, the Trinity, that's bogus, and that came from a council. Councils can err, so let's talk about the Trinity. That's not on the table, but nearly everything else is. So, Gabe, what do you make of the decision? What have you heard from people you talk about, and how they view it?
To be honest, I wasn't that surprised. I was disappointed, but I wasn't that surprised. I had talked to a few different people, and some were hopeful, but some were realistic. I think Bert Parsons once said, Optimists always call realists pessimists. And I get called a pessimist a lot. I wasn't that surprised. I don't really see how this exonerates him, maybe for that particular matter, right? But we do still have an open case with the SJC that if decided differently, or if there's a minority report, could still come before GA. So
Yeah, and I wanted
wouldn't
to talk about that. I have on screen now the CIM, to add another three-letter acronym, the Committee to Investigate Memorial. So the case that's still pending and undecided, I believe it's been argued. I believe they've looked at the evidence, but there's no decision. I mean, that could come tomorrow or 4 months from now. I don't know. But it was an investigation of the Memorial Presbyterian Church session in St. Louis and whether they erred in hosting Revoice. So it's more of a referendum on Revoice than on Greg Johnson or Missouri's handling of him. I think it's possible we could have a different result on that one, and that's what Gabe prefers to. And I have there were 9 judgments. Some of them are not in question, but several of them are contested by the same elder who filed the original, the case that's already been decided. This could come before the General Assembly if there are enough for a minority report. So some people think the matter's over. I think, given the dynamic of our church, which is largely teaching elder dominated, it's probably going to be easier to find against a session and a conference like Revoice than to find against an individual who's sympathetic in some people's eyes. So, Gabe, I just wanted to bring everybody up to speed on that because I wanted to talk about it. So it's the CIM that's an issue here.
A new acronym. I'll have to write that one down too. Yeah, I mean, as long as he's on social media every day and promoting his book, I would say that he's keeping the matter open. And the SJC may have ruled one way in this case. There is a possibility that he is going to get himself in trouble if he doesn't temper his speech. And I just don't see that happening. I think that unfortunately he's becoming more bold, and it's also sad though that we are so focused on one person in this, because it's the issue that we're dealing with, not the person. And whenever you put a face on something, then it becomes about the person, and then you can look like a bad guy because you're after this person, and that's just not the case. You know, his book, it has a sad title, if you ask me, Still Time to Care. The message he's sending the world is that the PCA doesn't care about sinners, and it's just not true. We love people. We love Jesus. We want to tell everyone of the saving grace of Christ. And we want people to be changed and impacted by that grace. And it doesn't matter what sin it is. Sin is interchangeable. We see them as different, and God does see them as different, but they're all an affront to God, all of it. So I wish that those on the side B side of things in the PCA would stop discouraging the laity and the watching world by telling that story in order to push their agenda, because at the end of the day, that's really what it boils down to.
Yeah, it's there's what I would call a myth that the church has always been terrible to all homosexuals. I don't think that's true, and I also think that it's an example, wittingly or unwittingly, of sort of an intersectional victim construction, and I think that just doesn't mesh well with the church, dividing people up. There have been a lot of blanket statements made about well, half the General Assembly or all of the PCA or all Calvinists or all evangelicals or all conservatives, and it's just not helpful, and it's not true. We all know, we know that from experience. We've all counseled. If you're an elder, it's not going to be long. You're not going to go long before you counsel somebody who's in a grave sin, a sexual sin, somebody who's a victim of this or that. I think we know what the real world is, and I don't think this victimization is helpful to what we're trying to do.
No.
Let me also note the report the Missouri Presbytery did on the Committee to Investigate Memorial is 151 pages long. You can go on the Missouri Presbytery website, and there's probably more than 1,000 pages total on these various investigations. That's one of the daunting tasks that anyone faces trying to dig through it. And I don't envy anyone who has to read the full record of the case. But to say it hasn't been examined is that just wouldn't be true. So, again, I'm calling the show PCA On the Brink. Some people may think that's histrionic and over the top. I don't think it is. We've got Revoice, which has not been resolved. It's by the SJC decision that didn't put the matter to rest, because we have another one coming. We'll have more overtures. As you mentioned, Greg Johnson seems to be making, I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way, he's become a professional gay Christian. That's his brand, his platform, his emphasis. He has made a career of it. My theory is that if Revoice hadn't happened, or if it had been hosted at a non-PCA venue, if Greg Johnson hadn't come out in the Christianity Today interview and said some of the things he said there, he'd be living peaceably and happily and ministering to his congregation in St. Louis. But he says as much, and I think I read it in a tweet thread. He thinks God has called him to bear this cross and push this issue and portray this, and his book is certainly part of it. And I do believe it's divisive. I don't believe anyone asked for this. I don't even believe the progressive or missional part of the PCA was looking for this. Yet they have embraced it, and they do advocate for it. So that's part of the reason the PCA is on the brink. We don't have any resolution of the Revoice issue. But there's another one that's not wholly unrelated, and we see that with the Presby leaks. And today, the first major article about this has come out, and let me find the proper tab. There we go. Todd Pruitt wrote an article for the Reformation 21 site, and it is called "Making Sausage with the National Partnership." Now, let me try to. We've done shows on these networks in the PCA before. I don't remember what the original one was called, but then there was the PPLN, the Presbyterian Pastoral Leadership Network. That sort of went away and morphed into, in 2013, the National Partnership. They are a secretive or confidential organization. It's interesting that we've just had these leaked emails that tell us a lot about the National Partnership, but the only other things we really know about the National Partnership also came from leaked emails. If we go back,
it's interesting that if you were to abbreviate National Partnership and not Presbyterian into two letters, it would both be N and P. Sorry, that's just my super insightful analysis, and I believe another podcast that Todd may or may not host, no free ads, may have alluded to it being a not very Presbyterian thing to do. So I'm not treading new ground here.
I thought
away.
Resby, you were going to chime in on the sausage and how sausage is made from extensive culinary experience.
I have long registered my malcontent with that phrase, despite its accuracy. I forget. There's some other episode, some GA episode a couple years ago. I think I vocally shuddered into the microphone when it was mentioned. But love sausage. Planning on making some tomorrow. So there you go.
Somebody's got to make it. Just don't ever forget that. But almost everything we know about the National Partnership came from leaked emails. This is not new. In 2013, we have on screen an email that was kind of an invitation email to the National Partnership, and it was published in the Aquila Report. And George Robertson was the author. He's the connection between the PPLN and the National Partnership because he was also a part of the PPLN. I don't know why it went away and this organization was created, but it was. George Robertson is now in the EPC. He's no longer in the PCA, but he was part of the original National Partnership. So you can look that up on the Aquila Report and read about the original sort of unveiling or apocalypse of the National Partnership. Then in 2017, and boy, does that seem like a long time ago, there was and leaked is this is not really there's an email list, I think with about 600 people on it, associated with the National Partnership, but they say not exactly the same thing. And one of those emails was published in 2017, and it gave us a real glimpse into the actions of the National Partnership. There's a fellowship dinner. One of the things they've done very well with is fellowship. And they have a big party, usually on Thursday night. I guess it is. No, it's Wednesday night at General Assembly. But they revealed
they even had an ice cream social.
Yeah, that's been done. But one of the things about Presby Leagues is there's not that much new in it because we were told, very frankly, in this 2017 email, that they were very organized, that they had a Facebook Messenger group that would be running real time to help people know what to do. And that's a special area of interest for Gabe. So this group who they oppose the narrow faction, which I think they mean the TR or the confessional faction. They think they have the original vision of the PCA captured and they encapsulate it, and that they actually are the majority. They are the middle and the maybe the more progressive elements kind of all rolled up together. But Gabe, you know a little something about this this vote whipping, this communication at General Assembly, don't you?
I do. I saw it with my own eyes in 2019. 2019 was my first GA, and I think I got on the Facebook groups, the Teaching and Ruling Elder groups, in 2018. So just to connect to other ruling and teaching elders around the country, I searched on Facebook, PCA, TE, and RE, and things like that. And I found these two groups, the uncensored group and the censored group. And there was all this talk about revoice and all of this. And that was the first I learned about the NP. I knew from some PCA history about the PPLN, but I thought, we had matured and become more civilized than that. So I was surprised to hear that there was something like that going on. And of course, with social or with electronic communication, it was probably, it seems more powerful and secretive perhaps than the PPLN was. So I paid close attention when I went to GA 2019 I was sitting by a gentleman who I kind of towered over, so it was easy for me to see what he was up to. And I saw
Gabe is a large man. If anyone doesn't know, he's a large guy.
Well, and this guy wasn't, so it was easy to see over his shoulder. I saw first a Facebook group chat going on about the moderator vote, and then during various committees, I popped in to just watch overtures. I'm on nominating committee. That was my first year in nominating committee. During nominating committee when do we go up? February or March or something. I saw some of it taking place, but I didn't know what it was. By GA, I knew what it was. And I saw what was going on, and you could see there was kind of an amoeba of people that would move together in and out as votes were happening and things like that. And I got a little closer and peeked over at somebody's phone that I knew. And it was, the Facebook group chat that in 2019 or 2019, they tried to bring up an overture for electronic. Or no, that was this year. It was supposed to be 2020. Corona's got me all messed up, but it's supposed to be 2020. Then it carried over to 2021. The overture to prohibit electronic communications during debate and committee work. And that was where that came from, other people seeing it in action. So you put a post the other day about most ruling elders' experience at GA. Show up, your teaching elder takes off. It's like a big class reunion for the teaching elders. The ruling elders are left kind of wandering around, lonely, scared, like deer in the headlights. And thankfully, I made a few.
You were like a moose, though.
Well, yeah,
not a deer.
Still timid though for the first half hour or so.
Yeah,
but I was
see
fortunate.
Those moose on like Alaska State Troopers, and like, oh, cool, look at this huge moose, and then it charges into someone's living room. So.
Yes, that was me. So luckily, I made not luckily, but by God's providence, I made friends before, so I wasn't so lonely. But I did see all of that in action, and it was disappointing. I left that year pretty upset by the politicking and the secrecy of what was going on. We're not talking about guys texting each other saying, hey, what do you think about this or that? We're talking about, a Facebook group that's secret. You can't even find the group. It's invitation only. You search for it, you can't find it. It's invitation. You are part of an exclusive voice that's influencing people on the floor or in committee. Apart from that, it's not Presbyterian. It's not the way things are designed to go. So Presby Leaks also didn't surprise me, and it didn't disappoint me because I was glad that this was finally out. I mean, we've been talking with these guys till we're blue in the face, asking direct questions. Are you part of something like that? And we keep being told over and over again that it was just a group of friends emailing. There's no leader, there's no membership, there's no coordination, and it was all just not true. And Todd brings some of that out.
Let me jump in. That 2017 email mentions that James Kessler is our political director of sorts. So I've also heard people criticize us for conflating an email group that's basically associated with the big party, and that's what I showed you just a minute ago, and the National Partnership. But the author of that email that in 2017 told us a lot about this organization, he conflated them. It's one we. So the criticisms of Todd for conflating, and I've already heard some, conflating the big party email group and the smaller National Partnership political group, that's it's not altogether clear that they're all that distinct, but let's note that. So some would, but everything we've learned about it has come from leaked emails. I mean,
right, because
that
it's
just
all
hit me today. That's
confidential.
Yes, it's confidential.
There's no website. There's no mission statement. There's no who we are, what we believe, what we do, why we do it, how you can help us. There's none of that. Unlike the GRN.
Yeah, right. And there's a lot of whataboutism, or there's a lot of I know you are, but what am I? There's an idea on the National Partnership side that there's some equivalent organization on the conservative side. Let me say this very clearly. There is not. If there was one, I'd know about it. I'd probably be involved in it. There is not. There is. There's no coordinate. Go ahead.
There was the Gordita Crunch thread in 2017.
And that was a Twitter thing,
which was
yes.
That was about as organized as anything got.
That's right. I don't think I've ever had a group of emails or text messages with people at General Assembly that had more than 4 people in it. The conservatives in the PCA barely seem to believe in organized religion, to use an old Baptist joke. There is no cabal on the conservative side. The GRN is not knowing what I know and have known about the National Partnership since 2017, I've been upset, and I'm not being hypocritical when I say this because it was a necessary reaction. I've been upset with GRN for not being more political, for not being more organized, and not being more aggressive and forthcoming. There is just no equivalent to a group of 200 or 300 or 400 people who are coordinating votes and committee assignments, and they say, I think in some of their communication, that they are especially concerned about RPR. That's Review of Presbytery Records, which is a good way to protect latitude and allow latitude, and also the nominating committee.
Yep.
And Gabe's seen that. We've got another mutual friend who's been on the nominating committee. He's seen it there. And we are not organized, I can tell you that. And maybe it would have been equally wrong if we had been, but I think organization from the confessionalist side is maybe an unseemly but necessary response to what we learn about the National Partnership. And Todd has obviously read the emails, or some of them, or he's had people that have told him what they say, and he's not distributed them publicly, but he has written about them here, and he's probably put a target on his back by doing so. But what do you guys think about what Todd revealed in this article on a respectable website about what we'll call Presby leaks?
Go ahead, Stephen.
I think he did a very good job. I think he was measured, had an even hand. He did not divulge at length the contents of those emails, which I think was appropriate. Additionally, though, narrowing in on representative NP presbyteries, I walked away from this article and I came to the conclusion, this is a denomination. This is a denomination
within a denomination.
And the level of organization that is, we can infer from the National Partnership and what we know about it, the PCA is about this organized on a denominational level in terms of representatives and committees. And so it's just, and Charles, you said it well, there is if we need to operate in secrecy, or if we need such high levels of coordination and caucusing in order to have the PCA be what it is that an accurate representation of the PCA? If you need to organize to this degree to have a PCA worth having, is it worth the effort? And
you allude to James Kessler's one of his articles pre-General Assembly, where he did admit to being the founder of the National Partnership. So we do have that on record. But that's what you refer to, something that he wrote around the time of General Assembly,
which is a public document. So in the lead up to General Assembly, we all remember there was the PCA worth having. there is the open letter, and there was the open letter from previous moderators of the PCA-GA. I wrote a response to the open letter because I found some straw manning, red herrings in there. But beyond that, a PCA worth having. Who determines the worth of the PCA? I think that's the question. Is it going to continue to be prominent, though a small group of voices, or do the people on the ground, and we're a grassroots Presbyterian denomination after all, do we have a say in what the PCA is?
Well, let me note that, as from what I can tell, this group, while it's not exclusively teaching elders, pastors, it is probably in the 80 to 90 to 95% range. So it is an elite group. Probably one of the connections might be Covenant Seminary, but that's that's a simplification.
You haven't sifted enough yet to know that.
Right. Yeah. And so it's a clericalist movement. It's dominated by pastors, and pastors who think they have divined the original intent of the founders of the PCA, and that they somehow inhabit the spirit that the PCA was always supposed to have, and over against a certain minority who they, I think it's fair to say, they demonize.
It feels like apostolic succession a little bit. We've inherited the true and genuine spirit of the PCA. And so, and understand, I've been here 5 minutes, right? But Chortles, you've been around. There have been lots of people in the PCA who have been around that when labels like good faith subscription are slapped on the denomination prior to 2002, 2000, that they just object to that. So I struggle when people say this is the PCA worth having, and it's a PCA wherein we can win every vote only on our terms. That is not an accurate reflection of the diversity, either theologically or methodologically, of the PCA. So if you have to work so hard to keep this big tent up, and you have to go to such levels of coordination to keep the big tent big, is it really a big tent? I think not.
All right. Well, and to Chortles, your point, I would like to mention, I searched 8 years worth of emails. I combined the document, so it's just one big document. And I searched ruling elder. In 8 years worth of emails, ruling elder takes up 10 spots in this whole document. And half of them are related to quantity of votes. So it appears that the national partnership's biggest use for ruling elders is bodies to pack votes. There's, I can tell you that the conservative men in the PCA were concerned with teaching ruling elder polity, teaching ruling elders to be stronger and better versed in the confession, our standard scripture. They were interested in building us up, right? What I see from 8 years worth of national partnership emails that the ruling elders are basically soldiers, cannon fodder, whatever you want to call it. They're almost we are almost an afterthought. Don't forget to bring your ruling elders. They'll help us with votes on the floor. Now that's not all they say, but there's little about teaching your ruling elders, coming alongside your ruling elders, educating them, helping them through the process. It's mostly as an afterthought. We need to be there, schedule your drinking, make sure you're there for the crucial votes, and hey, bring your ruling elders. It's kind of insulting. So you do, going as a ruling elder, reading through it, it did smack of a little bit of an elitist, like they thought of themselves as elitists. Now, Todd points out that you have a small group of men claiming that they have a voice for the majority. And that is a problem because they seem to think that their view of where the PCA is and should be is held by the majority. To which I say, why does it take 8 years worth of secret politicking to keep losing votes if you speak for the majority? And why does it have to be a secret if you're speaking for the majority? I would have less of a problem with them if they were as transparent as the GRN, because it's really the fact that we disagree on these things. That's what Presbyterianism is about. We agree on the major things and we disagree on some of the minor things, and we disagree on what's minor and what's major sometimes. But the fact that they think they speak for all of us, but they do so in secret, and they're not winning the votes. They're going to great lengths to pack the committees and the commissions and all of that. And it's hard for me to reconcile how very intelligent men can think they're in the majority and they have to work so hard to barely win votes or to lose them. Doesn't make sense.
And Gabe, just to that point, the national partnership, when the brothers operated behind sort of closed doors and in the email groups, the appearance was much more synchronized. It's kind of like synchronized swimming. But then I think with the PCA worth having, the open letter, and then the GA moderator's letter, for which they got considerable blowback, it looked a lot more like doggy paddling. I say that not to be insulting, but it just, the NP operated best in secrecy. And now that they're out in the open and open to critique and to dialogue and to constructive criticism, there's something of a breakdown. So I think from this point forward, and it's my hope, and I appreciate sincerely that they published their advice on Overtures 23 and 37. I appreciated the open letter and the GA moderator's letter. I think it's impossible to put the toothpaste back in the tube at this point. I think that there needs to be operation out in the open for the sake of the members of the partnership and for the sake of the unity of the denomination at this point.
Well, the big pushback is going to be that because the emails were stolen and that they shouldn't have been posted publicly. The emails had to come from someone inside their group. No one hacked in, and there's no allegation that that's true. Somebody that was a part of their group went to great lengths to share them, probably because of an issue of conscience. It was sent to a small number of people who distributed them to a larger number of people. I think they were received by the original recipients on Thursday night. My theory is that by, Friday morning, 500 people had seen them, and by the end of the day on Friday, 3,000 people had seen them. They're well and truly in the public domain now, for better or worse. And let me make two quick points. I think the thing that the director of the National Partnership is most upset about is that someone posted public links to some of these, and I don't think that was a good idea, but it did happen. So they're not happy with that, and I can understand that. There are some ethical issues with some of this, but I will say, based on the little bit I know about the emails, and Gabe, it sounds like you've seen a lot more of them. Maybe you can confirm this. There was no personal information in there besides email addresses. There was no, brother so-and-so has, he's an alcoholic and he has this problem. These were not personal emails in the sense that we might think about it. They were political, organizational emails. They were almost like work emails in a way. There was not, I don't think there was any private stuff in there. And if there was, I would not be for their distribution. And I don't believe in their public distribution. But as big a deal as this is, a group that seems to have been controlling the denomination and that may in some sense, have destroyed the deliberative character of our highest court, and even that they exert power at the presbytery level. There's an argument to be made that it's so important that people should be taking a look at this. But do you concur, Gabe, that there's not anything terribly explosive or personal or private that in those emails?
No, I didn't see anything like that. I've looked through them, spent quite a bit of time reading through them. I didn't see anything personal like that. The only thing that I saw that was personal were a couple times where they disparaged someone they viewed as on the other side. They were not kind to Mel Duncan, who is a sweet man, a good guy, honest as the day is long, and he certainly didn't deserve anything that they had to say. But I didn't see anything else, about personal struggles or anything like that. It was all, politicking and talking about policy and the best way to position yourself and thanking people. There's some stuff in there that, I saw a couple times where they thanked people who were heading some of the committees, chairmen of some of our committees at GA, thanking them for their help on things and organizing and coordinating things and stuff like that. So I think some of that deserves a second look. But no, nothing personal. I did see today somebody in a Facebook group comparing releasing these emails to, releasing information from executive session. And I thought, come on, that's a stretch. It's a stretch. You have, no matter what disclaimer or request for confidentiality you have in an email, there's no expectation of privacy ultimately. And several times throughout the email chains, Jim Kessler mentions we've had a leak, somebody released an email. I think he mentioned Todd Pruitt getting an email in the past. So gentlemen, you know that you have a low expectation of privacy. He mentions several times throughout that he knows that somebody's leaking, at least occasionally, and he knows that even though he's requesting that they be kept confidential, that they're not always going to be kept confidential. He gives people an escape. He says, if you want off the list so you're not compromised, let me know. We'll take you off the list. So it's
so they knew the risk. You're saying they knew the risk.
Right. And then to turn right around and try to act like we've done something wrong by reading these things. It's just a diversion.
Yeah. And there are ethical issues here. And I think if any of us thought there was, really compromising private stuff in there with personal details, none of us would have been for. Not saying any of us are for their distribution, but we would have certainly rebuked people and said, but this thing took on a life of its own in about a 12-hour period last Thursday, or 24-hour period last Thursday and Friday. So the toothpaste is out of the tube, and but there are probably some of the people who have maybe posted or handled the emails will come under criticism or maybe even disciplinary action.
Maybe they just wanted to help the PCA. Maybe they just wanted to help the PCA keep up with the NFL and their ongoing email scandal.
John Gruden and the like. Well, there's nothing salacious like that in these emails, I don't think. I haven't heard that there is. So the long and short of this is, back to our title, PCA On the Brink. This has just turned up all the stress and strain and Sturm und Drang to 11, if not beyond. And there's going to be, I was telling my wife, but I told somebody else, because of the Revoice issue, but now because of this, the unveiling of the national partnership and the bad feelings that's going to cause from those who think the national partnership has not played fairly and has exerted a dishonest type of influence, and from the national partnership people who are mad about the release of the emails, from the people on both sides of the Revoice, Craig Johnson, memorial issue, the SJC votes, there is no safe place. There is no place of peace in the PCA, and there won't be one for some time, I fear. And again, there's going to be more. It wouldn't surprise me if more things didn't come out. I do have this is not really taking the ethical high ground, but I have a hypothetical, and that is if there was a group of conservative Southern Presbyterians and they had a private group and there was racist language in there, or there was collusion, or there was something said disparaging about, a great man in the PCA, would the other side, I say in air quotes, would they feel bad about the release of those emails? And we do have an example, and it's alluded to at the end of the Todd Pruitt article. It's the Genevan Commons fiasco. That was a private group who seemed to make criticizing Amy Byrd, but also Todd Pruitt and Carl Truman, when they were all on the podcast together, Mortification of Spin. They came in for a lot of abuse by that private Facebook group, and I say abuse not in a legal term, just a lot of disparagement. And those emails, images of those private messages were distributed far and wide, and I'm pretty sure some of the figures on the other side of the PCA certainly viewed and maybe distributed some of those. I mean, that would seem to make sense, and sided with Amy Byrd in particular against this group that wasn't very nice. So I'm not saying turnabout's fair play, but as we evaluate these things, we need to be realistic. We need to, as Todd said in his article, the sins of other people or the errors of other people shouldn't make you feel better about your own. We all can sin very easily in these ways, but I think some of us think the denomination, its future is at stake here, and that this is a really big deal. But we don't need to adopt the by any means necessary philosophy, I don't think. So, anything else anyone wants to say about the Presby leaks, and what you think's going to happen in the next 6 or 8 months, and what you would say to people who are troubled by all this? What counsel would you give?
I actually had a question I wanted to ask Stephen quickly about overtures. I don't know if this is true, which is why I'm asking if you know or not. I had probably 3 people tell me at GA after the Overtures Committee reconvened that the powers that be in the national partnership said if we pass these, or if we recommend these overtures as written, that they would support them through Presbytery. Did you ever hear anything like that?
I had heard that such conversations have been had. The substance of those conversations I won't speak to, just because I didn't hear them.
Right.
But I will say that even in the reconvening of the Overtures Committee, the language that national partnership representatives, I'll call them that, and somebody from the majority who made the motion to reconvene, that it was not the exact language that they had brought to the table. It did undergo revision in the reconvening meeting. So I could understand somebody saying, we would have agreed to pass these through presbyteries if the language that we had desired had been the language that was passed. So I'm going to give it that kind of charitable read. But like you, I'd heard through the grapevine, but at the end of the day, I don't want to speak for what those individuals said.
Right. That's why I asked if you heard anything directly, because it's like a game of telephone. It changes a little bit every time.
Well, there did seem to be a change of heart because, quite frankly, the margins that the overtures were passed were pretty historic and unprecedented for the last 10 years. Since 2010, that I know of. But a lot, maybe there is an organization that changed its mind and put out talking points and kind of changed their strategy or really formulated it after General Assembly. And maybe that's why we're seeing the overtures have such a hard way, to go at the presbytery level. But I don't know. But and people have the right to change their mind, and I think assurances given in the heat of political debate shouldn't be given too much credence anyway.
Right. So to your question, do I think we're on the brink? I think we kind of are, but honestly, the reaction to the leaked emails makes me more optimistic. I mean, this is still Christ Church. We are, if everything's going smoothly, then we're probably not working hard enough. So I don't think that. I mean, this just confirmed what we knew, right? So it's not a big surprise. So it's not like these emails came out and I was taken aback and thought, oh, we're going to hell in a handbasket because of this group that's trying to steer us, because we know that they've been there. So actually seeing the amount of work that Jim Kessler and the amount of thought that he puts into this and the directives that he gives, I want this, I want that, you do this, you do that, even though occasionally he'll say, now you do what you want, these are just suggestions, the marching orders are pretty clear. So seeing that level, it's more organized than I thought it was. So seeing how much work they had to put into getting the traction they got, it actually made me feel better about the PCA. I think there are a lot of good, faithful, confessional men who don't play these games, and I don't think we're going to pass these overtures. I don't think they're going to make it through Presbytery, so of course they won't be taken up again in 2022, but something new will come to the table in 2023, and there will continue to be faithful men, if they don't leave, that will fight the good fight. And we're always going to battle the world and the culture trying to encroach upon the church. So we can't give up and leave when these overtures don't make it. If they don't, we have to stay and fight another day. So I'm optimistic. I mean, it took them a lot of work to lose as badly as they did, which is, kind of their words. They really looked at this year as a loss. So, I'm optimistic. I'm praying for the PCA. I'm working hard for her. And I think that's what we need to continue to do. Like I always use the going down with the ship analogy. Until the only thing that's sticking up is the mast, I think that we are called by our vows to stay and try to right things.
Yeah, and some are getting shaky and talking about leaving, and I think that would be tragic for more churches to leave bit by bit, piecemeal, when the alternatives are not that great, and local fellowship is so important. So I can imagine an area where three confessional churches would leave. One would go this way, one would go another, and one would strike out to become independent. That's happened. That's happened a few hours from me, where from one presbytery, churches have ended up three different places, or, a couple of presbyteries. Churches have dribbled away, and they didn't coordinate. They didn't consider the need for accountability and local fellowship the way I think they should have. So Presbycast is the last voice telling you, just leave, go out on your own. All is lost. It's not really up to us whether it's lost or it's recoverable, or whether we don't know what the future holds.
Right.
I assume, Stephen, you have a similar view.
Yeah, I am an optimist for the denomination. I think that the truest representation of the PCA you saw at GA 2021 in St. Louis, and in St. Louis, no less. Mm-hmm. So what a wonderful representation of the persuasion and the positions of the PCA. But additionally, with Machen, he kept fighting when he founded the Independent Board for Presbyterian Missions. He kept fighting until they threw him out. And so I think that the confessionalists or the traditionalists, that we have a moral obligation to fight the good fight of faith until we cannot fight it anymore. So whether that takes the form of charges or whatever have you, I'm not saying we go out of our way looking for these. Machen was not a factionalist. We just celebrated Reformation Day. We do not want a fringe break-off movement. We want to reform the PCA. And Reformation is only going to come after a long, hard fight. So I think confessionalists, hang in there, encourage one another, and use the church courts. Let's keep fighting until we get kicked out, I guess. I mean, that's what happened to Machen, and it's what I think we need to do.
Well, Zoe Shimke there had a good word for us in that comment, and she's right. We have to remember, folks, progressivism is a long game. Confessionalism needs to be a longer one. They have patience that we don't always have.
Let's note, as I always do, that there's not really an equivalence between Machen's fight and ours. He was up against people who denied the miracles, the virgin birth, the authority of Scripture, the inerrancy of Scripture, the resurrection. That's not what we're dealing with here. It's two different conceptions of the mission of the church, I believe. I've often characterized it as Presbyterians versus evangelicals, not conservatives versus liberals. There are many good people in the middle. There are many good people on the other side. And I think for a while, the PCA sort of worked together and held together as a fairly diverse lot. I think part of that was because the founders were big-hearted, believed the best about the other side men, and were not threatened by diversity. I'm not sure those who consider themselves the majority that we've been talking about tonight are as open and optimistic about the group that might be in the minority today, but maybe we're not. And I think that's what Stephen was saying, that the General Assembly, if not the Presbyterian attendance and that sort of thing, the last General Assembly seemed to represent the broad, the breadth of the PCA, and we saw a result that was, I think, shows we're sort of a center-right conservative denomination, and maybe we'll see that again. But it is a long fight. It takes a long time to turn around a battleship, and or even a rusty old destroyer, and maybe that's more like what we are. So, anything else anyone wants to say before we bring this in for a landing?
You've just got to build back better.
Yeah.
I would simply try building back better.
We all love that one.
Yeah. Chortles, I mean, I so appreciate you said it countless times on the podcast, and I just want to echo what you said. There are no theological liberals in the PCA, but I think that experience of contending for truth, Machen was fighting theological liberals. We are not. These are brothers in Christ. And yet, I think the battle weariness is something that we will struggle with, and some people will be discouraged and give up. And so that's all I'm trying to speak to, not speaking to the theological persuasion of our brothers in the PCA. Just that.
I didn't think you were, but we do. I mean, there are people on the right, on the conservative side, who assume things are worse than they are, and they assume that they do import secular politics and secular categories and talk about liberals and conservatives. But if you've studied history and theology, you know that liberal has a precise definition, and it's almost a disservice to Machen in particular if you don't handle that term properly. So, well, I thank you guys for joining us, and I'm glad Resby's back with us after his short hiatus, and trust all is well in the Resby household. Is that so, Resby?
It is indeed well.
Well, if you will tell everyone good night, I think we'll end.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Stephen and Gabe for coming on. Everyone for watching, commenting along, engaging. However you've chosen to consume our content, we greatly appreciate it. We're PresbyCast. We'll keep doing this week in, week out. It's our cross to bear. One of these days we'll have a final episode. But until then, don't be a nerdman. And probably use two-factor authentication on your emails.
Down the streets of gold marched a hero of the Lord into heaven's fold. When he met the Savior at the great white throne, I believe he smiled and said, "Stephen, welcome home." I see Jesus standing at the Father's right hand. I see Jesus yonder in the promised land. Work is over, now I'm coming to thee. I see Jesus standing waiting for me.
Magic on the internet worldwide.